this morning. Let's start our conversation with Gideon Falter, who's the chief executive of the non-governmental organisation, the Campaign Against Antisemitism. And he joins me this morning. Gideon, thank you for your time. This rise, then, in anti-Semitic hate incidents, any possibility that could be explained by more people coming forward to report abuse?
Well, one might think that it was something to do with reporting, were it not for the fact that this is, I think, the fourth year in a row of record high incident statistics. And in a way, this has become almost unsurprising for the Jewish community. Many Jewish people will be looking at these statistics, feeling shocked, but also feeling sadly unsurprised that for yet another year in a row, anti-Semitic incidents have pushed past all previous records. And you don't get these kinds of increases for this kind of period just on the basis of people increasing reporting. And we're seeing a huge amount of anecdotal evidence as well from the community about people saying that they are particularly fearful, as well as more scientific evidence. So we did a study with King's College earlier in the year, which shows that a vast number of British Jews now feel that they're considering leaving, they're feeling personally threatened. And what is coming through with these statistics are a couple of themes. One, there seems to be a link to conspiracy theories and far-left discourse about Israel turning into toxic Jew hatred. And then there's also this theme of a failure to prosecute and a failure to hold these people accountable. And I think the two go hand in hand. We see from these statistics that the majority of the perpetrators are men. The majority, about two-thirds of the perpetrators, are white. There is a worrying minority of black people and people of Middle Eastern and Asian descent who appear to be carrying out these incidents. But the majority of people are white men. They are emboldened by conspiracy theories. They are parroting all sorts of anti-Semitic tropes, which are disguised as discourse about Israel, but often will do things, such as replacing the word Jew with the word Zionist, for example. And what we're seeing is these people getting away with these attacks year after year and seeing that the Crown Prosecution Service won't hold them to account, that they can get away scot-free. And it emboldens them. And I think that's why so many British Jews are increasingly fearful. Now, the Community Security Trust, saying that a rise in online incidents is the most obvious single factor explaining the overall hike. Now, that is more difficult to police in a sense, isn't it? It's more difficult to prosecute. If what we're talking about here is an increase in abuse perpetrated or propagated through social media or online, that is no less serious, but more difficult perhaps to clamp down on. It can be a lot harder. We've got problems, of course, with the social media giants largely being based in the United States, often being uncooperative with the authorities here. But we even see a campaign against anti-Semitism. We get incidents where it's fairly clear who the perpetrator was. They weren't hiding behind an anonymous account of any kind. It was quite clear who they were, and yet the police still failed to take action. And we've actually had to, on occasions, privately prosecute individuals ourselves in order to achieve justice. And it shouldn't be that way. Every year, the Crown prosecutes around 15,000 hate crimes every year. And yet we are not yet aware of a single year in which more than a couple of dozen prosecutions for anti-Semitic hate crime took place. So there's this clear failure by the authorities to actually grasp anti-Semitism by the roots and really ensure that these people face British justice. Conversations about anti-Semitism over the last few years feel to me as if they've gone hand in hand a lot of the time with conversations about the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, a man who himself admitted that his party had a problem with anti-Semitism in its ranks. And at the very least, one could reasonably accuse Jeremy Corbyn of not getting a grip on the problem of anti-Semitism. He, of course, is no longer going to be the leader of the Labour Party. You talked about far-left anti-Semitism a few moments ago. Do you think the future direction of the Labour Party will have an impact on these numbers? Well, I think that one of the things to remember, which I found particularly heartening about some of the polling that came out after the election, was the extent to which the British public actually cares about anti-Semitism as an issue. And I think one of the things to remember just before we go into that is to remind ourselves that actually Britain is a very tolerant country, and a lot of people are actually completely disgusted by that. That said, we are also seeing within the Labour Party there is this real infestation with anti-Semitism. There's a failure to deal with it. And of course, if you've got people who are mainstream politicians who are legitimizing or failing to apologize for anti-Semitic their anti-Semitic statements or anti-Semitic actions, then of course that sends a signal to some parts of society that this is okay. And the normalization of anti-Semitism is a real worry for us, because once the genie's out of the bottle, it's very hard to get it back in.
Particularly,
it takes a lot of effort by the whole of society.
Sure, particularly given that we're just a few days past Holocaust Memorial Day. It's extraordinary to me, and it would be extraordinary, I think, to any objective observer, that here we are in 2020 with the lessons and the horrors of the Holocaust, which is essentially anti-Semitism taken to its logical and horrifying conclusion. Those lessons, those horrors, appear to be, at the very least, getting forgotten.
And that's one of the saddest things to be telling survivors, because Holocaust survivors, obviously, they're getting older, and each year that we mark Holocaust Memorial Day, there are fewer survivors with us. And one of the things that the survivors want to hear is that this couldn't happen again, that the lessons that they've been spending their lives teaching have been learned. And one of the very sad facts that we have to admit from these statistics is that there are people who haven't learned the lessons at all. In living memory of the Holocaust, these people are out perpetrating attacks. They are actually even mimicking Nazi propaganda and Nazi slurs. And really, the criminal justice system has a lot to answer for failing to crack down on these people and ensure that they face British justice.
Do you think, and again, a political question here to an extent, when you have a president like Donald Trump, who at the very least is ambivalent about literal Nazis walking on the streets of America, as we saw a couple of years ago, given the global reach that Trump has as a figure, do you think that his actions, that ambivalence, has given some kind of shelter to anti-Semites in the UK?
I don't see any data that suggests that Donald Trump's having an impact on anti-Semitism in the UK. What I see is there are really two types of anti-Semitism happening. There's conspiracy theory led and often far left-leaning anti-Semitism, which is usually in the form of words, but also clearly from these statistics veering into physical attacks as well. And what we also see is we see people with this sort of old-fashioned type of thuggish, racial or religiously motivated anti-Semitism coming and attacking Jews as well. So we've got these two types of anti-Semitism, which we've actually studied. They were the subject of our study with King's College, where we see what we call sort of classical Judeo-phobic anti-Semitism, which focuses on the race and religion of Jews, and then we've also got this sort of more anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, which sort of takes the Jewish state and uses that as a method by which to attack Jews. And both of these things are increasingly understood now. The government was one of the first in the world to adopt the international definition of anti-Semitism. But really, it's the failure that we're seeing is not a failure to understand the problem. It's a failure to clamp down on it. And that's what it just comes down to again and again when we speak to victims, that they went to the police. Often the police will have done an excellent job investigating, but when it came to the Crown Prosecution Service, they just failed to act. And it's very telling that the current Director of Public Prosecutions actually refuses to meet with us.
It is agreed, I think anyone listening would agree, that to clamp down on this, to ensure that prosecutions happen, to ensure that people are punished for this, is absolutely part of the answer here. But coming back a step on this, Gideon, how do we next year and in future years get these numbers coming down? Because we're talking of a record number of anti-Semitic hate incidents being reported to this charity. How do we reduce the number, or go about reducing the number of these attacks happening in the first place?
Well, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism believes that there are two things which must go hand in hand. One is education, and the other is enforcement. And if you imagine a school where there's the most wonderful education, but no matter what children do, they go unpunished, it's not going to take an awfully long time before the school is rampant with ill discipline. And really, all of us are not so different. Society is not so different. If you have a society in which people are educated, people are tolerant, people are good, it doesn't take very many bad apples to really start upsetting that. And it's the enforcement that has to come along. So I think that we're already very good in this country at education. I think there needs to be more of it. But I think Britain is quite good and certainly needs to get better. It's pretty good at Holocaust education and education of our children to be tolerant. The thing that we are terrible at, certainly when it comes to anti-Semitism, is enforcing the law and showing people that if they engage in incitement or bullying or physical attacks, they're going to be very firmly punished. And that is why we're getting these statistics rising year after year, because people don't fear the consequences of their actions.
And just a very quick final word on this. If someone has been the subject or the target of anti-Semitic abuse in any form, should they have confidence? Do you think that they deserve to have confidence, that they will be listened to when they report this and that they should have a reasonable expectation that something will be done?
They certainly should. Our polling shows that most British Jews don't feel that confidence. And if they've reported something and found that nothing's been done about it, or they're not sure what's coming next and they want a little bit of advice, they should just email investigations@antisemitism.uk and we will provide them all of the help they need along the rest of the way.
Gideon, thank you. That's Gideon Falter, Chief Executive of the non-governmental organisation Campaign Against Anti-Semitism.